Hello, everybody. Welcome to your post-game reaction for Canada's match against Uruguay, their second of two games in this European trip, in this international window. Bonjour to you on the French side in Canada. Throw on your toques because we've got your Canada reaction, everything you want to know coming out of first, the 2-0 win against Qatar last Friday in Austria, and then, of course, this loss against Uruguay in Bratislava. David Goss, Patrice Bernier, former captain of the Canadian national team, and Calen Carr, former captain of my heart, here to talk all things Canada with you. Patrice, let's just start out with initial thoughts. A week in Europe, an unknown, playing two World Cup opponents, but not from CONCACAF, from Asia and from South America, a new test. What is your overall feelings coming out of it?
Overall, yeah, I think quite satisfied. The Qatar game clearly showed that you're way above Qatar. That you could say that you have the tools to be better than a team that's still qualified. One of the teams that qualified for the World Cup, and the game against Uruguay is just to show that you are on the cusp. You're okay. You did get outmatched. Now you still have details to finalize before you get there because. Yes, definitely playing Belgium, Croatia, and Morocco will not be easy, but you got some answers from the Uruguay game. So overall, I think you want better results, but I think in the performance, you can be satisfied that you're true to the identity they developed, Canada, and that you're able to play and manage and create chances versus some prominent teams, even if the differences were large between Qatar and Uruguay.
Calen?
Yeah, I think there were some positives to take for Canada, and we've talked about their journey and going through CONCACAF, qualifying top of the group. But this was the first time that they got to test themselves against World Cup opponents outside of the region. And it was a big test. And I think, yes, they started super well against Qatar and had a really convincing performance. And then this was the first time against Uruguay that they fell into a hole. And the good thing for them was they didn't sort of crumble. They came back. They created opportunities. They were able to get opportunities in the first half, especially. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 shots to Uruguay's 2 or 3, and Uruguay came away with 2 goals, and Canada was down 2-0 at halftime. And I think that just sort of shows that as the level goes up and the quality goes up, that the margins are going to go down for error for Canada. And when you look at their group, they're going to go up against the likes of Croatia and against the Belgian side and Morocco. So it's going to be a very difficult task for them. And I think, yes, they weren't walked off the pitch by any means, but I think there'll be some hard lessons learned. And you want to learn those lessons before the World Cup and not at halftime in Qatar where you're saying, oh no, it might be too late.
Patrice, let's talk about that raisin level. Tier 1, as John Herdman loves to talk about, those elite teams, those elite players. Uruguay, one of, I believe, 7 nations that's ever won the World Cup. So they're in a category unique. Belgium and Croatia, I think most people would say, are in that conversation. The way they played at that level, Canada did. What did you learn about how they can go out against those teams at the World Cup? Are they going to sit deep? Are they going to open things up individually? Who's shown at that level for you?
I think it was really interesting because Uruguay, for me, will be a bit like Croatia in terms of low block. Even most European teams, they don't like to press that much. Belgium is a aging team, so will they go out there and press? So you're playing against a team that was low block, and Canada needed to possess and find solutions. They did. They still created some chances. Were they threatening all the time? No, but at least convincing, saying that they can move the defensive block and position themselves favorably offensively. So now we did see what now prominent forward players from opposition teams were able to do, and Calen mentioned it. With not so much chances created, they still scored. So that's to say the likes of Suarez and Nunes, what they can do to you. 2 players, cross, and the free kick, meaning that details at this highest level, as he mentioned, the margins are very slim. So the game in terms Canada identity promise, but I'd like to see Alphonso Davies maybe put in positions where he's taking on people and he's consistently being a threat, because I felt that we kind of phased him out. He had to go further out to get the ball. And your better players, you want them to be at their best and threatening, especially offensively. But for the defensive part, you're going to have to pay attention to be a lot more alert, because the Lukakus in the world, the Kevin De Bruynes, you give them half a space. You saw Nunez cross just a little bit, came off, peeled off from the blind side, and boom, scored. Don't need that much. So raise the game, raise the level, but I think they can do it, and they're going to have a game at least before the World Cup to prepare themselves. Not everybody has that, and not everybody will have a long camp to prepare properly for who they're going to be playing in the first group stage.
And if Canada does go down, you saw what Uruguay does is for sure what's going to happen in the World Cup as well, where they're going to go into that lower block, they're going to get bodies behind the ball, and they're going to send numbers at Alphonso Davies at every task that he gets it. And they're going to look to surround him, cause problems. And even still, he's able to wriggle out a couple times and create problems for Uruguay today. It just, but I think Canada, to find success, they have to take those moments in transition better when the game does get stretched. And it did, especially near the end of that first half, where they're able to get some opportunities to get him in space with the ball or without the ball, moving directly towards goal. Then you get Jonathan David involved. Then you get Kyle Larin or others. And I think that was, they had a couple looks at that and they weren't able to capitalize, because it becomes difficult once they were able to sit in and the game became a little bit more comfortable.
There was injury concerns coming into this camp. Noah Tiba Hutchinson, Jonathan Osorio withdrawing late. Tejan Buchanan still fighting back from his long layoff from injury as well, Patrice. But yet we only saw one change between the Qatar and the Uruguay starting lineup from John Herdman. Do you think that was a mistake to not see more players for the first time at this level? Or do you think it makes sense to solidify what your best 11 could look like?
Me personally, I'm a bit disappointed, because I would have loved to see a Joel Waterman. As you saw, he's having a successful season at CF Montreal. You brought him in knowing that you haven't seen him as much as the others who have consistently been with the group during the qualifiers. So maybe just to see him, how does he fare against international talent? Maybe against Qatar, I would probably have seen him there, because you understand Uruguay, they're going to be a little bit more difficult. And maybe, test out a little bit other talents just to get some answers, because you could clearly see who his 11 will be. And the fact that we're talking about Atiba not being there, we know he's part of that 11 when he's healthy and fresh and ready to go. So those are the parts where I would have expected a little bit more rotation, just to see one or two or three players, because you don't want to change everything. Most coaches don't change. They like stability. They know who the players they're going to bring in, but it's the players that you're not so sure of, if you could say, because his words were, John Herdman, were, we know he's doing well in MLS. He's really good at passing, but we need to see how he fares against an Alphonso Davies in training and other talents that he doesn't see under in MLS. And that's where I thought maybe to see him would have been easier to answer questions, knowing that Donnell Henry and him are probably in a battle for those final defensive spots in terms of the team. So that's where one part where I would have loved to see just players that we don't know, or Coliocho of this world, who is in La Liga, we're young, maybe just see him a little bit more, because we didn't see him at all in any minutes in the two games.
I think it's because you want to cap tie him, because I think he still has some dual national abilities.
Yeah, he's got triple national. I think he can play for Nigeria, US, and Canada, if I'm correct. But it's just because, you know, we don't know, outsiders don't know him as well.
But I think to some point, though, I think Herdman is stuck in a difficult decision there, because he also hasn't had a lot of time with his first team going against this level of opponent. And so there's a balance between saying, do you want to play players where you want to make decisions on who's going to be on the World Cup roster, or do I want to give my 11, or what's as close to who's available of my 11, a real run out against a team like Uruguay and Qatar, two World Cup teams before the World Cup? And I can understand why he would want to do that, because this Canada team must be said, has not been, as much as they finished top of the group, has not been to the World Cup, and is relatively inexperienced going against, a team, especially with the likes of Uruguay, that has the history and prestige and have won the World Cup at a certain point in time. And so I think that was maybe some of the decision of why I could see him sticking with the 11 and trying to run it back and say, this could be a really big confidence booster going into, a really tough opening match in the World Cup. Is it Belgium first or Croatia? I've lost
Belgium first.
Okay. So yeah, you want to give them a run out, and yes, they do have one more game, it must be said, against Japan right before the World Cup. That will also be useful. But I said it while we're watching the match that it feels like Canada's kind of cramming for a big test. And I think he wanted to use every moment he possibly could with the players that he has available to him. And then he'll use that last two halves against Japan, hopefully with a healthier team, with Hutchinson back into it. I think they missed him today. And Jonathan Osorio was also not available. We'll see if he can get back to health in time. So especially in that middle of the pitch, there's some question marks as far as the depth goes. But I thought Piet over the window was a big winner because he seems to have the trust of Herdman. And they had some trouble. He doesn't give you all the things going forward, but I think he's solid. And, for a manager, if you're going deeper into the middle of midfield, you know what you're going to get.
Patrice, you've played alongside Sam Piet for years. You've also played that center midfield role for Canada as well. Piet got the start in both the games. Ismail Kone came off the bench for him as well. And we saw Marc-Anthony Kaye for a few minutes. What do you walk away from looking at that depth chart in terms of confidence in each of those players? Where do you stand now behind, most likely, we hope, Atiba and maybe Jonathan Osorio?
I think Sam Piet won some valuable points in those two games. I think John Herdman knows him quite well. Even at the beginning of the year, in January, he got injured in the Honduras game. He was a starter. Unfortunately, that cut that period of time. Maybe he would have played more significant minutes. But clearly, John Herdman trusts him. And you have to understand that they play in a 3-4-3 with a lot of players going forward. So in that middle part, those players have to have the volume to defend, attack. And yes, I know Sam Piet has been a player that most people go like, yeah, okay, but offensively, his choice of passes are not the same as a Eustáquio or a Tiba but he recovers the ball. He's steady. He's sound. And when you play two in the midfield, and we saw in the Uruguay game, the midfield was outnumbered in a certain way, and they had to stick there. And when they were beaten, it's a boulevard. So you need players like him that are able to do that job. Now, do you want players that are able to do a bit of everything? Yes, most likely. I think an Ismail Kone not ready to play 90 minutes at that high level, or at least be a starter. But you want those players that are able to defend, attack, contribute in all sense of the game, like Eustáquio is capable, or a Atiba when he's healthy, or even a Jonathan Osorio. So, but Samuel Piet, I think, for me, it's never been a question that he's not going to the World Cup. It was just where does he stand as in terms of how John Herdman will want to utilize him against different opponents because he brings a different type of skill set to this national team. So, but he won points playing those two games and showing that where he's at also in MLS, because he's been playing quite well with CF Montreal in these last few weeks or months. And then after that, it's just to see who will be the one or two or three that will be added on, because I don't see John Herdman making drastic changes. It's just who will be the fresh, informed player that will be voted into the group to be part of the 26 going to the World Cup. Like I remember, I mentioned Joel Waterman. He's played solid in this year. He's been the mainstay for Wilfried Nancy. At one point, maybe the guy he trusted the most when he had to rotate, he was one of the ones who played regularly. Now he's in that position of depth chart position, and he fighting with Donnell Henry, who for Herdman has been part of the group, knows him well, put him in games like against Mexico where he wanted physicality or people to be at fort. He came into games also, so he knows Donnell Henry well, but Donnell Henry's season has been a bit lagging in terms of minutes and in form. When playing LAFC, going to Toronto, I think lately injured also. And now you have the question, do you bring a player who's in form? And Waterman knows Johnston and Miller. so he can connect to them if he has to play, because he plays with them on an everyday basis, and they'll be playing in the playoffs, and hopefully for them, they go a very far stretch, which will allow them to have some quality soccer games all the way leading up to the World Cup. So Waterman coming in, and Samuel Pet for me he's there. It's just we know once Atiba's fresh and healthy that he's starting 11 material with Eustáquio most likely.
We saw Corbedo come into the side for the Uruguay game. He's a guy who's playing well right now over in Europe, trying to make that late charge onto the end of the roster. Liam Miller in that conversation as well. Derek Cordelia is probably fighting for one of those final spots. And could we see a Luca Koleosho? Could we see a Daniel Jebbison maybe right on the end of the roster at the last moment? A lot to watch out for, and a lot more still to come. We'll, of course, have all your coverage of the Canadian men's national team on MLSsoccer.com, and we will be with you alongside the ride for the entire World Cup adventure, the first one on the men's side in 36 years. So get your toques out and get ready to go. Thank you to Patrice, thank you to Calen, and thank you all of you out there for watching.